like I've been saying this, I think Softgov is like slowly like wrapping up, and there's a few things that we have to finish, and they are very like things that we have to iterate slowly, and there's many insights and ideas coming from multiple places. So I just wanted to start with intentions to see if anyone has something to add to the agenda. And also, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion in a little bit. So just to start with a quick intentions, distractions, and if there's anything you would like to see in SoftGov before we start to wrap up at least this phase of this working group. And I'll pass to you, Tam, to start.
I'm so unprepared. Intentions, distractions. Intentions is to participate in SoftGov. Distractions are not many. And then what would you like to see before? I think maybe, I don't know if it's already in the manifesto, but just like what would success look like, if in the next phase, like is there a next phase, or does SoftGov dissolve into the TEC and permeates everywhere? And in either case, what does that look like? So what does it look like if SoftGov sort of retired, like wraps up? And what does it look like if SoftGov 2.0 launches, and what that would look like? So maybe it's sort of like what comes next. And I don't know that I have anything to add immediately. So I'll pass to Durgadas.
Does it work?
Your audio is kind of quiet today, Tam. I don't know what's up with that. I had to crank you right up.
Okay, thanks. I'll fix it.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Who did you pass to, Tam?
Durgadas!
Sorry, what am I saying? I don't know. I popped in and out. I was struggling with my audio.
Just intentions, distractions, and what would you like to see in SoftGov, considering that we're kind of like towards the end of it, at least this phase of this working group.
I'd like to see myself. There we go. Intentions, yeah. I mean, I just like to come. This is among my favorite of the groups. Yeah, I guess we're coming to the end of the phase, I guess, but it seems like this will become even more important in the regular running of the DAO, in terms of what comes next. And just trying to keep the culture of open governance and that kind of thing is going to be an even bigger challenge, because the stakes will be higher and there'll be money and other people, and that's going to be especially the case if Septimus's casino passes, because we'll have a lot of people in and out of here trying to knock us off of the culture that we built. So in any case, yeah, distractions is as always my regular job. And what was the third thing?
That was it. You got it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll pass to whoever hasn't gone. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Everybody but Tim. What about Mitch? You look excited.
Big me. Yeah, good questions. I'd like to talk about some things that I surfaced in the Stewards chat a couple days ago, and it was like how we keep on arriving at these like mixed decision-making processes, and sometimes they're half-baked and sometimes they're fully baked, but nobody follows up on them. And so, like, how do we deal with those situations? And I'll pass it to Zep. Zeptimus.
Oh my god. So cute.
Hi. My intentions are learning and kind of, I know this sounds like this group is phasing out a little bit more, but I'm trying to show up, kind of get involved more consistently, and kind of set aside some other distractions, which brings me to distractions. I guess all the other things outside of the space, there's so much just in general in this area that I'm relatively new, so kind of learning to set those things aside and focus on certain things. So yeah, I'll pass to Nate.
Hey Nate, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I couldn't hear if you said my name or not. Yeah, so my intentions are just to catch up and see where I can contribute. Distractions are none at the moment. I'm just, reading up on your agenda document. And what would it look like if SoftGov ends? It would look pretty terrible. I think that you kind of have to have this group for a little while until you have the working groups independently operating on their own, completely autonomous. What comes next? I would say that I don't know. It'd be really nice to see how these working groups kind of separate their work and have these kind of like sub teams or sub working groups. I think that's really something that we should focus on and trying to figure out how to organize their own individual teams and see how they can improve their productivity in that way. And I'll pass it on to Cesar.
Hey everyone. Let's see. My intentions are to sort of catch up with what the group has been up to. I think I missed like the last one or two meetings, so so I'm curious about that. Distractions, not too many besides my internet kind of being glitchy. But other than that, no major distractions. And then what's the last question?
Just what would you like to see in SoftGov?
That's a good question. I'm gonna have to think on that one because I'm not sure. I haven't like interacted as much as I would like to with this group. But maybe that's something I would like to see within myself now. But I'll think about this one. Check. Who hasn't gone?
Cool. Everybody gone.
Oh,
Thank
perfect.
you.
All right.
I just wanted to share that. Well, my vision for SoftGov is that there are some like foundational tasks that we are accomplishing. So I think the last one is just wrapping up this understanding of like how did we implement Ostrom's principles in the TEC culture, and making sure that everyone understands that, and having the solid examples. And then I have a few questions today that will help us iterate on that. It's a pretty big thing, but I think we are like starting to have a more shaped structure. And then I don't see this working group like dissolving as completely, but I think a next phase would be more like a study group instead of a working group type of dynamic. Like, I think a lot of the tasks that we're hands-on working are dissolved into many other working groups, and I would love to see SoftGov being more like, hey, what are some governance papers that we can read? What are some like research that we can do on what is happening in other communities? How can we improve the dynamism of our polycentric governance structure? What can we bring more to the culture? And then having more of this like insightful study sessions. So shifting from a working group to a study group, and then implementing things little by little. But I think a new manifesto and a new everything would be cool, just to finish this like phase of work that we've been for a long time, and that a lot of things were executed and a lot of working groups came out of SoftGov. So feels good, the pace that we're in. So there's just one like very practical thing in the agenda today, that is the snapshot decision. So I would like to have like a working group advice process that maybe we can get out of this call with this decision made. And what happens, for context, is we passed a proposal for the snapshot parameters that we were going to use just quadratic voting and quadratic ranked choice voting. So we've been using just these two so far, all good in that sense, but quadratic ranked choice voting had never been used in snapshot before. So we had to build a strategy for that. And Pedro did a great job on doing that. But what didn't go so well is that strategy influences all the others. So by having quadratic ranked choice voting, we have, what is the double of quadratic? What comes after? Octadric, octaves. Well, we have the root of 8 to the quadratic voting. So instead of like having just the, can somebody help me here? How do you even say
You're
that?
taking the
Instead
root
of,
of
You quadratic squared.
yeah, you have like the square of the square.
the
Oh.
root of the root, you mean?
The root of the root, yeah.
Oh boy.
So that's what's happening with quadratic voting. So we have two options. And we talked to the snapshot team. It was a little bit hard. It was not like a super easy back and forth conversation. I think they've been having a lot of demands with other things, and this was something that they couldn't help so much with. And there are some limitations in Snapshot as it works right now. So we have two options. We either need to put in and out that strategy every time we want to use quadratic ranked choice voting, or we leave that strategy there and then we use the normal voting that will become quadratic also. But then using the normal voting would limit our decision making to just yes or no, because that's the only way it would work. because in quadratic voting, there is a feature that people can divide their votes between many proposals. So that wouldn't be possible if we use just the normal voting with the quadratic strategy that we added on. This is a bit complicated. Did it make sense?
So if we chose the yes or no voting, it would limit us to 2 proposals at the end for the runoff.
No, we
Instead of-
will still use the quadratic ranked choice voting for the runoff. So the quadratic ranked choice voting is working, but then the rest is messed up, by wanting that. So that is solved. We can use quadratic ranked choice voting. But then for the other proposals, we can either leave that strategy there and then use the normal voting that will become quadratic instead of using the quadratic voting. Or this is one option. And then the other option is we only add the quadratic ranked choice strategy when we need to use ranked choice voting. I preferred the second one, but then there's kind of a moral question that is only a few people can add that strategy there. So the votes become a little bit permissioned.
I mean, at the end of the day, Snapshot is just used for signaling, and there's no on-chain link. So, I mean, there's going to have to be some decision-making and discretion by some small group of individuals anyway. So I think that the second one is a lot better. But I was always assumed that these were separate instances of Snapshot, though. Are they not?
Separate instances? What do you mean?
Like a completely separate token for the quadratic rank choice versus just the quadratic instance for the TEC?
No, it's just the strategy. So it uses the same token. Like only people who have TCH token, and then in the future TC token can vote. Can vote and propose. But the strategy is what affects that. So is the question clear for people? Okay, I'll reframe the question. Can we use? Does everybody agree that we use? That we add in the quadratic ranked choice voting strategy just when we're going to use ranked choice voting, even though this makes the votes permissioned to whoever has the ability to add that strategy there.
I get it. And I think because you can still make votes on behalf of other people. And it seems like a pretty nuanced vote and a pretty nuanced voting method. And I don't think it has any serious on-chain implications. So I think it's fine.
People would still be able to make their own proposals. The only thing that needs to be someone that is that has the permissions is to add the strategy. So like, let's say you're not one of the addresses there that can add a strategy that can change the settings, but you want to make a ranked choice vote proposal. Then you talk to me, for example, and you say, hey, can you add the ranked choice voting strategy there? And then I add the strategy, and then you make your proposal. And then after I remove the strategy, it needs this.
Yeah, okay. I guess as long as it's communicated clearly, like who to contact. Doesn't sound ideal, but
Seems like it's something that we will use so rarely. So, yeah. I think that probably what will happen is when somebody chooses ranked choice voting, then we'll probably have to be like, oh yeah, we could also do this quadratically. We would just have to set it up in advance. I don't even know that ranked choice voting is something we'd use that often.
Cool. I'm also in that opinion. Does anyone doesn't agree with this? So I'll consider this a decision made. Does anyone needs more time to think about this?
It just seems like we're constrained by the tech right now. So we just have to operate under those constraints.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, at worst case scenario, we're just kicking the can down the road a little bit.
Worst case scenario, what happens down the road?
We're just kicking the can down the road a little bit, like, to solve it later.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think these tools are really good for signaling and information gathering, but outside of that, I don't think we'll use it much, like Tam said.
Okay. Okay, that was helpful. Thank you. So I'll post in the forum that we took this decision. And
Did Snapshot say they weren't going to be able to accommodate that at all in the future?
they didn't say about the future. They just said that's how it is now. Like they didn't seem interested to solve or to even guide us on how to solve. So okay. Next topic. I think I'll leave this for last. The params experience, or no, maybe we can do this now. So is there first of all, I think it's clear for everyone now that we only need 5 proposals and 5 people advocating for these proposals. So like the idea is by the time that we postponed the vote, we didn't have this. We didn't have like 5 different proposals that 5 different people were comfortable to advocate for. I think it seems like we are on a path now that we have that. So I wanted to ask if there's any questions about that, and if there is proposals that you guys feel like you have a good understanding that you could advocate for, or if there's anything missing there. Like, no, I need to learn more about the proposals. I don't really know how to find them. Like, is there any problem with understanding the proposals that are there and the params and considering the param party we had last week?
I need more information. Like, do we have an Excel sheet with these parameters or a database for them set side by side with numbers and things like that?
Well, there's GitHub issues.
But no way it's side by side comparison though.
Well, I mean, there's always the personal initiative. If you feel so inclined to comb through those GitHub issues, and you can just take them, they're in Markdown, and you can just throw it in the spreadsheet.
Okay. Yeah, I've got it halfway done. I just want to make sure there's not easier way to do it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to see that. I was thinking of the 5 that come together. Those are the ones that would really focus on comparison because there's so many. to do a comparison of now. And yeah, I am very swayed by the rationale, so it's sort of like looking at the numbers is an indication for me, but it's like reading the rationale along with the numbers is sort of what I find to be most convincing.
Well, part of my issue with the whole thing is that I just don't have any experience in any of this. And it's also true that I think we're also a little bit informed in terms of what's going to happen now. I'm really mindful of the experience of like companies like Roblox that started off as family friendly, groups that are now just horrifyingly enabling predators and and basically gambling and all these things. And it's just when money gets involved, there's all these things that all these compromises happen, and I don't know in terms of how that evolves. So I see that there are certain time frames and some other metrics that enable us to maybe modify those things going forward. It's just I guess I worry a little bit in terms of cultural impact. Like if we end up with a bunch of people in our culture who weren't here and don't really know what's going on, if that culture can be vastly modified just because of the stakes involved. Let's say that I'm suddenly worth hundreds of thousands of dollars because I've got a bunch of tech tokens. Geez, maybe my thinking's going to be real different. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't know, and it's a real concern for me. So I
I
don't
hear what you're
know how
saying.
to predict what the parameters that we're setting up will do in the long term. I can hear all the rationale that I want, but every time I hear one rationale, I'm like, well, on the other hand, this other negative thing could happen. So it's just so hard to know.
You had something to say?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to say this exactly, but um, at the end of the day, we can debate them as much as we want within this circle here, and we can create our own and talk about the merits of each. But at the end of the day, whatever we think, it will be decided by the token holders. So even if we think between this circle here, the culture should look like this or should look like that, ultimately the people who acquired the most TCH tokens will be the ones that decide the configuration.
Well, but they are also inserted within our culture. Like, I don't think it's this circle versus like
You're
who.
right.
I think it's an important question of like the way I thought we could frame this is just what types of compromises are we having culturally? Like, it doesn't mean that they are negative or that we shouldn't have them, but maybe it's a good thing to just be aware of, like, is there anything that we're compromising when the economy is going to be open, and then just like having that, like, we don't even need to act on anything.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood the context of this discussion then, because I thought it was like, are people clear on like how this whole process is going to work?
No, it was initially, but I think Durgadas just raised another point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just a
And then
secondary question, right? I don't understand so much how the parameters work. I haven't created my own because I've been to a bunch of Prams parties. I don't fully understand it. I don't have enough experience. This is my very first DAO. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's just so many things I don't know about, the effect of things in the long term, and when there are, big money things at stake. I've seen the evolution of other communities and see them sort of after the fact, but I don't know what this place could look like after that kind of pressure comes. So I'm glad we have people who've been around in communities like this, like Griff, who perhaps have a steady hand with the thing, but the parameters in terms of just the strict numbers of that just doesn't say enough to me about my concerns to, make it so that I feel a little better about that. So yeah, there's a bunch of unknowns, not for lack of trying. You guys tried like hell to educate me and so on. I just, have long-term questions that can't really be answered right now, I guess.
Cool.
I mean,
Yeah,
let me
thanks
jump
for
in and
sharing.
say, like,
Mhm.
sorry. I think a lot of us feel that way, Durgadas. I mean, certainly I do too. And I've reached the point where it's like, I'm so comfortable now. I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I really finally have like the params that I feel are important and where they should be. And then I was having a conversation with Griff today, and he pointed out something that I hadn't pieced together before. And it was about this idea of having a low reserve ratio, but then the issuance of future tokens would be lower, so there would be less governance rights to incoming. And I was just like, wait, I thought I got it. So there's always like new things to learn, and I think that that's a big part of this experience. Is like, people are acquiring little by little these little pieces that we're clicking to put together a shape that we can hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
I feel
part
the
of
same.
me
But I
for
think, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, part of me wants the final debate to be centered around that rather than the proposals themselves. But they might be focusing on the proposals. I was just curious about the format for final debate. It's gonna be 2 hours long, but I'd really like to deep dive and explore all the dynamics of these design choices and have that presented to everybody who's attending, rather than saying this proposal, I'm defending it for whatever reason.
I think those reasons are the design choices, right? Like the
Yeah.
rationale that you're building as your. I think so. I guess so.
I think that'll be part of the format. We give 2 hours long. We give a bit of extra time to really go into those things that you're saying, Nate, because they all apply differently compared to which proposal you're looking at.
Well, and for me, it's like a polarity map in a way, right? The most common polarity map is stability versus change, right? And so how do you X that up so that the benefits of stability exist and the benefits of change exist while minimizing the risks of both, right? And I would sure like to see stability versus change, map. Mapped out like that, so perhaps people could have a clearer understanding of where proposals come on this kind of thing, and or what it is that we're putting in place to modify those things if some unforeseen risk comes about as a result of making a certain kind of decision.
That's a good point. And welcome, Craig and Griff and Aloysius. Maybe we could, I think there's a lot of great ideas coming up here. Maybe we could have some type of culturally framed debates. Like, how could we look at the proposals from the cultural build standpoint? And maybe that could be one debate itself. If you wanted to structure that, Nate, I think that's what I understood from what you were proposing, that it would be good to look into these lenses through the proposals. And I think that goes a little bit with what Durgadas was saying, like what types of compromise are we having culturally once the economy becomes active, like how to be more mindful of that. And also what Zaptimus said, that that he's questioning if the TEC casino is a good proposal for the culture. So it seems like this is coming up for many people, and we could have a debate centered on that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we may want a bunch of speculators in there. It's just, do we have a cultural support in there that would prevent potential, backlash from that? Do you know what I'm saying? So what I hear a lot is just focusing completely on the parameters. But you could have a thing where we're like, yeah, we want speculators in here, but we have a cultural build that says, okay, we're going to be ready for that. Do you know what I mean? So that the culture doesn't spin up and out and become something unrecognizable to us, right? So that's, I guess, part of what I'm saying is, whatever it is that we're going to choose, are we culturally prepared for whatever that is too? So.
Yeah, I think that's been. I think we've been looking into that, but definitely maybe something like this would be one extra step. Maybe Nate, if you feel excited about it, to look into something like this, like how to structure a debate focused on the cultural build. It could be part of the spreadsheet that you're working on.
Okay. Yep. See if I can find any insights to highlight for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to help too. We could have a session to collaborate on that.
Yeah, I could definitely. I think we should talk for at least 15 minutes, Nate. So there's a bunch of little things to show you.
Okay.
Cool. And then the next topics I wanted to bring in is somehow related to what you said also, Mitch, of the of how are we managing these decisions, of how like some decisions they escape sometimes our framework, and how are we dealing with them. And there's something I've been chewing on this week that is exploring the consent space. So what are some boundaries that help consent to thrive? And what is our idea even from consent? So there are like so many governance papers about this and the difference of consent and consensus, and how can we hold space for consent to exist. And I think there is a power structure that sometimes is quite invisible that can work on how people respond to things that can look like it was a consensual decision, but it might feel like it was an abusive decision for the person that took it. So this leads to like, how do we act when boundaries are crossed? And I think this will help us to map a little bit deeper the graduated sanctions design. So for example, what happened, like, oh, we had that rush decision and then we had a whole session to discuss it. And then we had a lot of learnings from there. But how can we bring those learnings into like our decision making space, our like design space?
Yeah, well, hopefully after all this introspection and look, like we come out with some clear guidelines as a result, right? I mean, take your learnings and then put it into something concrete and then implement them. Because I mean, we can talk about it for hours. There's so many different points to talk about, but at the end of the day, if you don't walk away with anything tangible to present to the community or between yourselves, then what's it worth?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm proposing we do now. That we look into tangible points.
Well, so I had a good discussion with Griff and probably some other of you, and so it was like we walked away from there. It was like, okay, minimum 24-hour advice process. It's like that's it, and ideally it can be available like asynchronously, right? So we identified that two things, I think, from that conversation specific to this situation was that it was done very quickly, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes tops. And people who didn't know it was happening, most people didn't know it was happening. And so then it happened without the majority of the community's input or awareness.
Yeah, I think the first...
Go ahead, Libby.
I think the first step is identifying like under which container that is. So, like for example, that was a container that was that decision was probably for the whole community, but
Listen,
the container was
it doesn't, because I don't want to put it in a container because I don't want them to be rules, but it's like things that we should reflect about. Be like, can everybody in every time zone see this? Okay? And can everybody who is not in the meeting see this? So it's like these factors of like having to be at the same time in the same place are limiting factors.
No, I think the containers are important because they are one of the factors of advice process. That is, who is going to be affected by this decision. So this gives a container. It's like, who are the people that need to be paying attention in this, and how can I communicate with them, and how can I reach out to them? So I think this first evaluation of who is going to be affected by this gives a container as an output. And in that sense, it's like, oh, maybe this wasn't a working group decision. This was a community decision. So it's a much larger container. And then that factors in time for how long that should be visible. How are people going to be notified about this? And I think there's other factors too, that it's more what I was wanting to bring to this discussion of like how people need to feel prepared for participating in a decision. And I think Aloysius has been bringing this to my attention a lot of like how well people feel when they need to decide something. Like what are the accessibility we are providing for people that need to participate in a process. And this has to do with what you're saying too, of like maybe it's a minimum of 24 hours advice process. Maybe there is some type of mapping of the authorities that people have in that subject. Maybe stewards will feel more comfortable to pitch in, and how can we open space for other people to pitch into? But I would love to hear from others too.
Livy,
I mean,
did
if
you
we're talking,
go ahead?
go ahead, David. I'll go right after you.
I was just saying, I don't know if you saw that graphic that I posted. There was like a 6-part trauma-informed sort of, I don't know, what do you want to say, social space, and then I think we do the first 5 of those really, really well. Ostrom's principles handle some of that. Maybe if you can, is the link in the SoftGov? Maybe I can add that into this, and then you can see what I'm talking about. But I will say that it's really that final piece, I think, that we don't necessarily do as well, which is all the specifically the diversity space stuff. There's a whole bunch of other things which I like to pop in there so you could see it real quick, and then you guys can move on.
Yeah, Tim.
I was just gonna say, I thought we were gonna bring it up. Oh, but you'll pop it in. I mean, if we're using that, this isn't applied to all cases, but for this one specific case, I think that there's, maybe it does apply to more cases. There's the decision, like, should we extend the timeline, yes or no? But then there's like, what does it mean? Like, if we don't extend it, what happens? If we do extend it, what happens? So it's sort of like, well, what are the consequences from the vote? And I feel like there's, I don't feel like, but oftentimes if a group is making a decision, that's sort of portrayed ahead of time. So that information is collected and then it's sort of displayed so that people can understand the impact of the decision that they're making. So here's the trade-offs. If we do, and it's sort of like that session that we had was like accumulating a lot of this information from many different points of view, because it was the one place, like the concentration of all the stewards for all the working groups. So it was sort of like an opportunity to actually get input And then, it would sort of be like the next logical step would be like then for somebody to write up the here's the case for postponing, here's the case for not postponing, and then giving it to the community to decide. And that it just takes, it's a lot of work to prepare a community for a decision. Actually, it's just what I want to say. Whether that's 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours, I don't know that 24 hours like the number. It's like if we gave the community 24 hours to vote, but we didn't provide them the consequences of the vote, it's a waste of time, right? So it's more about having a vote and information so that people can make informed decisions about what they're choosing. It's what I want to throw it in.
And how many things do we really want to decide by vote? Like I feel like as few things as possible is really the goal. There should, in an ideal world, it's one person is making the decision, but there's advice process to be informed. So like in this delay thing, just like in some ways just appointing one person to make the decision, but then getting community signaling and community like input is really valuable. But like in the end, there's usually for most things that like in this case, I don't know who the best person is to make the decision, but figuring out who the best person is to make the decision and then making sure that they're informed. And I feel like we should try to minimize voting as much as possible because it's like Tam said, it's so much work.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
And I think, sorry, just a quick comment on that. I think what I'm talking about is mostly like not for voting, because I mean, the consent space is kind of clear when we vote on things because there is a structured process for that. But when we're talking about advice process, like how does this consent builds out, and how do people feel that they are empowered to make that decision and to include the feedback that is received, and that people feel like they were heard when they give that feedback. So sometimes there's this pushback between like, oh, someone gave a feedback that they think is really important, and then the person who is making the decision didn't consider that feedback or that concern. So what is the impasse in that case? Go ahead, Nate. I'm sorry.
No, I was just, I was trying to explore like exactly what you mean by the consent space, because the when it comes to making a decision, and I agree with Mitch with that decision that we made. I would much rather have a 24-hour advice process, but then it's like when you have a decision being made and you have somebody who is very adamant about, dissent on that decision, they should have a vehicle that allows them to escalate it to a community decision or a community vote. Not that every decision is going to be escalated to a community, but that vehicle should exist, and that type of consent is embedded within that process. Because it's like if I make a local decision within my communications working group and somebody disagrees and they have nowhere to take that, even though they may be right and 4 people may be wrong, they should be able to have that vehicle to say, hey, I want to ask a larger group of people what they think. And if there's some type of change in direction on that decision, that should be available and easily accessible type of information.
Can I pop in somewhere? I'm sorry, I get activated every time I think about things that I care about. I just can't help it. Thinking about boundaries, I think I've been really frustrated lately because I know that culturally, globally, I don't believe people have an actual understanding of what boundaries are, like as the word. Like, what is a boundary? What are boundaries? What are my boundaries? What do boundaries mean? And then I see people designing boundaries, and I don't think they know what they are. So that's how I think that they end up being biased and harmful. I know that my boundaries are things that I set for myself. Like, my boundary doesn't really have anything to do with like any of you. I have boundaries for myself. That's it. And I keep seeing people design boundaries for other people, and that's not how boundaries work. That would be what parameters might be, but you'd have to understand boundaries to not fuck up parameters. It's kind of like, it's all linguistics, and I like see the ways that we use words and process them, and then what that does. And I feel so untrusting of this space. In lots of spaces when people talk about boundaries, I'm like, yeah, let's talk about boundaries and consent, but let's get away from all the code and like actually talk about boundaries and consent, and then come back to this and apply the same principles in a grounded way to the stuff we're doing. Yeah, I think as a culture, we've forgotten how to communicate. We've been taught how to debate with one another and how to go to war. And voting is a quick tool to use to get to a decision, but it's also a tool to like silence voices, and not being able to see that is problematic. Yeah, I don't know. Those are my thoughts. My stuff's going to be really hard in the decolonization aspect. I believe a lot of what we are doing is recreating the same patterns and things that never served us in the first place. We just surrendered to because we didn't have better words. We didn't know how to process our feelings with one another. We didn't know how to talk. That's what I believe.
So how do we translate what you're saying about boundaries into maybe a different way of thinking about it, like permissions? And so there's a lot of things that we can consider like permissions, like authoritarianism and stuff like that, but it also like, how do we prevent people who don't care about what we're doing from totally ruining it?
Awareness.
Oh,
Awareness. I think we're moving too fast. In general, as a culture, we just do. We like look at the clock, think about the week, tick, 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 tick. And if we did all this right, I think we'd have to do it at like half the pace at least. And it's like people give away their ability to vote to somebody else because they don't have the time to get capitalism makes it so they don't have time to become aware. X, Y, and Z doesn't give them the time to become aware. And I think when we take the time to like teach other people and keep them with us, I mean, because if you don't, that's how you get a cult. You have like certain people who know things and they're moving around. If everybody else doesn't know, they're just following. It's like you want everybody doing stuff. Like if everybody's doing the same thing, then it's a little bit better than most folks just following everybody doing the same thing. Like where power comes in. I have a friend who blew my mind years ago and helped me start finding out that I'm autistic and unpacking my stuff from taking a class on consent. It just blew my lid off. I had no idea what consent was. I had no clue that I didn't know these things. I thought I knew all these words and what they meant. And then I took this class and it changed the way that I act and behave and think and how I act around other people and with other people. And I want to offer that in this space, make that available at tech somewhere.
that would be really great. We can definitely open space to have a session on that. I think it's really, aligned with also having boundaries and having rules. I mean, with many of the Ostrom's principles, and I think that's what inspired to think about this is just like how are we bringing the practicality of things into the principles. And I think a segue to also how do we implement or identify these things is just understanding what to do when boundaries get crossed. I think that is a big part of like building these rules, like you were saying also, Mitch. Like, okay, if a boundary that was established either personally or in a group is crossed, first, how do I identify that it was crossed? So that means that we have to have very clear guidelines or some type of like feeling check and bring this as a practice. And then understanding what is the sanction for when that boundary is crossed. So that comes into the graduated sanctions that Juanca has like built a good first framework for it. But maybe we could look back into it and see if, like, was there instances in the TC where boundaries were crossed, and how did we manage those?
Can I just say I'm
I
super
just want
interested,
to say one
Aloysius.
thing real quick. I'm sorry.
I was also.
I'm super interested, Aloysius, on any guided learnings we can have on consent. So I hope this this does turn into something that we can share with the TEC community. And then I also just don't want to let that one thing that Nate said slip past. I don't know how he's imagining it, but for me, I play a lot of card games, especially with my kids, and there's always like that wild card that can do. I feel like this sort of like community advice process is like a wild card, and if like we're not feeling sure, then like just the community advice process card could be something that we play as like just creating some space and some time, and maybe it's sort of like this 24-hour, maybe we could just lock onto that as a number for to have any number before we sort of move forward with an important decision that affects the community. We should probably reach an agreement, and we probably reach an agreement without that, but I feel like that's sort of like a tool that we can keep.
I wonder if it would be helpful. I mean, I think I shared this with other people before, but this is a thing which I think helps put some narrative stuff around this. So to give an example, I think the idea of going too fast that Aloysius was talking about, there's an awful lot of service going on here in terms of actions to benefit others. But at the same time, I think what they were talking about was that do I have the capability to actually benefit from that action? And so there is a kind of consent which needs to happen to say, I'm trying to do this thing for you, and are you ready to accept that? Are you, there's all kinds of, important actions that and understandings that take place in terms of how this works, right? And inside of this consent wheel, we have to think that if I'm doing an action to give to somebody, this person has to be willing to accept that from me. And what if they aren't, right? What if they're unprepared, or they're triggered, or there's some other thing that's happening? And so, yeah, that's why I kind of shared this, I think, with Livy directly. And there's also some videos about that. I think I've shared all this in the Gravity group in the past, but it might actually help programmatically if we're trying to come up with some idea about the way this works, to have an understanding of how this functions, and see if there's any way for us to do an evaluation of our processes to see where they land in this. So I was just going to make that suggestion.
We are on the top of the hour. Thank you, Durgadas. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I think there's a lot more to unpack here. But yeah, +1 to what Tim and Nate said, of being able to escalate a decision to another process. I think that's something we should think about. And let's coordinate on that, Aloysius, on that session for sharing. I think that would be really great. And please write any other thoughts in the chat if you have any. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Liviade.